Hello and welcome back to the Crime Reel. For today's true crime narration, we shall be looking at the case of Catrine Da Costa, one of the most shocking cases in Swedish criminal history. Catrine was born on the 19th of June 1956 in Luleå in North Sweden. The family moved to Stockholm, where Catrine attended school. She had planned to become a hairdresser, but whilst in high school she became addicted to drugs. This eventually led to her dropping out of school, living on the streets and turning to sex work to fund her addiction. As Catrine approached her mid-20s, she started to turn her life around. In 1979, she moved to Portugal, where she got married and had a son. Despite her best efforts, she struggled to keep her addiction under control and eventually had to abandon her life in Portugal and move back to Sweden. Before long, she was once again working in the red light district to fund her addiction. Catrine was fully aware of the dangers involved in her line of work and tried to mitigate this by taking care with the clients that she accepted, always trying to avoid particularly dangerous situations. However, as her addiction spiraled further out of control, she began taking greater risks, taking on clients who were known to be abusive towards women. In June 1984, Catrine disappeared. Her mother alerted the police after becoming concerned that she had not heard from her daughter for a few days. It was soon established that the last time Catrine had been seen was on the 10th of June, getting out of a stranger's car that was parked by the roadside in the red light district, Malmskillnadsgatan. It would take a month of anguish before Catrine's mother received the news that she had been dreading. Catrine's body had been found. On July the 18th, the police had discovered parts of Catrine's dismembered body hidden in a bin bag dumped under a bridge at Karlbergs Beach in Solna, located just north of Stockholm's city centre. It was unclear how long Catrine had been there, and the police had to identify her by her fingerprints. Her head, internal organs and genitalia were all missing and have never been found. It was impossible to determine her cause of her death. 3 weeks after the first discovery, another bin bag full of body parts was found less than a mile away from the first one. With news of these horrific discoveries being widely reported, a series of protests and rallies against violence towards women followed. Feminist activists, backed by a nation, demanded justice. The Stockholm police found themselves under immense pressure to progress the investigation and to deliver results. The case became known in Sweden as stickmorder, the cutting up murder, and ultimately led to a change in the law, which meant that men who paid for sex were criminalised. An initial theory based on the dismemberment of the body and the removal of the organs was that the killer may have been a surgeon, or certainly someone who was from a medical background and skilled with a knife. The first suspect questioned by the police was Dr. Tiet Heum, a pathologist at the Department of Forensic Medicine at the Karolinska Institute. The doctor was known to be a violent man, with many of his former colleagues describing him as cold, arrogant and creepy. However, none of this had stopped him from advancing to the top of his field. He was considered a leading mind in the world of forensic medicine. There was a further alarm bell found within the doctor's past. 2 years prior to Catrine's murder, Tiet's wife, Anne, had been found hanged in their bedroom. The couple were in the process of divorcing at the time. While this case had been reported as a suicide, many believed it was murder. Just 2 months after his wife's death, the doctor published his first medical paper that focused on strangulation. This was considered by many to be both unusual and callous, considering the nature of his wife's death, a death that he seemed cold and unaffected by. However, with no evidence to the contrary, her death remained classified as a suicide. The police showed a photograph of Tiet to women working in the red light district, and dozens of them recognised him, with several stating that he had been violent towards them. The police arrested the doctor and took him in for questioning. Whilst he initially tried to deny that he had ever visited the red light district, he later admitted that he had frequented the area and had also paid women for sex. Even though there was a great deal of suspicion around him, he was released from custody 5 days later as there was no physical evidence linking him to Catrine's murder. Another primary suspect was Dr. Thomas Algen, a general practitioner who was reported to the police by his wife on an unrelated matter. His wife Christina accused him of child sex abuse, claiming that he had abused their 1-year-old daughter. The police investigated this allegation, but no evidence was found. Despite this, Dr. Algen was now on police records and would become a suspect in Catrine's murder. It was in 1985, almost a year after her death, that the police discovered that both doctors were acquaintances and had in fact worked together from 1980 to 1981. It was Dr. Algen's ex-wife who alerted the police to the connection between her husband and Dr. Teet Haom. As the investigation of the two men progressed, Christina claimed that her daughter, who was still just a child, had said that she had witnessed the dismemberment of Catrine by the two men. Both a child psychiatrist and a psychologist were engaged by the police to examine this evidence, and both reportedly found it to be credible. It was now the working theory that both doctors had conspired together in the murder. In a completely unrelated crime in February 1986, the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme was assassinated near his home in Stockholm. As a consequence of this meant that the police resources which would have otherwise been put towards solving the Catrine Da Costa case were now redirected towards finding the Prime Minister's killer. While thousands of man-hours were devoted to the Prime Minister's assassination, the person responsible was never found. As such, it wasn't until the autumn of 1987 that there was a breakthrough in the investigation into Teet and Thomas. It was reported that years before, the two men had gone to a photo shop close to where they worked to have a camera film developed. The owners of the shop claimed it showed images of a decapitated and dismembered corpse. The shop owners stated that the men, who by this point had been identified as both the doctors, claimed the photos were part of a top-secret investigation that they were assisting the authorities with. And as such, the photo shop owners had never contacted the authorities about what they had seen on the film. With this new information, the police now believed that they had enough evidence to convict the two doctors, and the case went to trial in January 1988. The prosecution was built around the information provided by the photo shop owners and that which Dr. Algen's daughter had reportedly seen. The defence was quick to discredit the child as a possible witness, stating that the evidence provided by a child who was just 18 months at the time was not reliable. It was claimed that the child told her mother they threw the head away and then the lady was chopped up. It would seem unlikely that a child of that age would have been able to articulate what she had seen in such a way. The defence then proceeded to discredit the testimony provided by the photo shop owners. They said it was ludicrous to say that two doctors would visit a shop to develop disturbing images of their victim and risk getting caught for her murder. The trial was a media sensation and reported far and wide. Both Dr. Teet Haom and Dr. Thomas Algen were eventually found guilty of the killing of Catrine Da Costa. Due to the intense media interest and pressure from activists, the integrity of the trial was questioned, and ultimately the High Court declared a mistrial that saw the two men walk free from prison. This was again met with anger and disgust from the nation, with many seeing this as another example of the rich and powerful getting away with murder. At the second trial, the Swedish National Board of Health and Welfare were tasked with ascertaining the victim's cause of death. However, due to the poor condition of the remains, this was not possible. They were unable to say with 100% certainty that Catrine Da Costa had indeed been murdered, and as such, both the doctors were then found not guilty of the murder charge. Although acquitted in court of the murder, their innocence was by no means confirmed. The trial judge even declared that despite it not being possible to prove the two doctors were responsible for Catrine's murder, he was convinced that these men had cut up the body. They could not, however, be sentenced for this, as the statute of limitations for that crime had expired. The result of the trial divided the nation. Many questioned how a body that was found dismembered was not a murder victim, whilst others echoed the fact that no physical evidence was ever found that linked the two men to the murder, stating that the case against them was built around speculation and personal vendettas. Following the trial, the two men filed claims for compensation, but both were swiftly declined, and numerous legal attempts to strike the remarks of the judge have been unsuccessful. In 1989, both Teat and Thomas were barred from practicing medicine, and neither of the men have really worked since. In more recent years, DNA testing has proven that a hair found on the dismembered body, which is believed to have belonged to the killer, did not come from either of the doctors. As a result, it is now more commonly believed that the two doctors were innocent of this particular crime, and their lives were destroyed by their association to it. If these two men were not guilty of Catrine's murder, then how did she die? One theory relates to a Polish butcher by the name of Stanislaw Gonurka. 3 months before Catrine's body was found, Stanislaw was released from a psychiatric facility where he had been serving a sentence for the murder of a young woman in 1974. The young woman was strangled, cut up into pieces before being disposed of in rubbish bags. As was the case with Catrine, this young lady's head was never found. Stanislaw was known to regularly frequent the red light district in Stockholm and was known to the police to be very dangerous, particularly when drunk. Many of the women who worked in the red light district said that they knew of Stanislaw and he frightened them. However, he was dismissed as a suspect at the early stage of the investigation for unknown reasons. He died in 1987. In 2009, 25 years after Catrine's murder, the statute of limitations on the case ran out. That means that no one can ever be tried again for this crime. As such, it would always remain one of Sweden's most notorious murder mysteries. That concludes today's story. Please subscribe if you're new to the channel, and remember to click like and comment down below. I'd like to thank Unsolvable for passing me over this script, which I used as part of this case. There will be a link to Unsolvable's channel in the description below. I'd also like to thank a friend of the channel, Lasse, or Lass, as he did mention a while back that I should look into these two doctors. Today I'm going to give you the post message earlier than usual, and that is that this case was the inspiration behind the publication of Stieg Larsson's The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which was titled Men Who Hate Women. Thanks for listening to the channel. Stay safe. Goodbye.